For the last 2 nights we've been talking about Dogen's Bodaisatta Shishobo, these 4 methods of the bodhisattva. And we've been talking all this time about the first one, which is dana, or offering, or giving. And we need 1 more night. And I say that understanding that the more I think about this topic, every time, I see that this whole practice is framed in terms of giving. It always has been. So even when we stop talking about it, we're still going to be talking about it. It's all we've ever really been talking about. It's all we're going to talk about. It's so central. It's so fundamental. You can't take it out. You can't understand what this is without it. Without it, we're just being quiet. Without it, we're just slowing down. With it, there's a kind of energy to that stillness. There's an energy to that silence. There's something moving through it. But we're at the very end of this section. Dogen writes, "The Buddha said, one may offer and use one's own gift. Even more, one can pass it to one's parents, one's spouse, one's children. Therefore, we should know that giving to ourselves is a kind of offering. To give to parents, spouse, and children is also offering." So again, we're opening up the idea of giving, and the first thing that he says in this section is that you can give something to yourself. And what does that mean? What I thought about as I was rereading the text this morning is how I think people feel vulnerable, maybe now more than ever. There's a lot of talk about burnout. There's a lot of talk about self-care, trying to figure out what we need in order to be okay. And that's important, and that is something that we need to be honest with ourselves about. We need to know when we're bumping up against our limits. We need to know when we're not getting the thing that we need. But that isn't what's being spoken of here when he says you can give yourself a gift. You can make an offering to yourself. And the reason for that is that offering, as we're talking about it here, and I think this is important, when we talk about offering, when we talk about dana, we're not talking about that in relationship to what is needed. We're talking about it in relationship to what we have to give. If we talk about it in terms of what is needed, then there's a kind of ledger. There's a balance sheet. There's a way to understand that the giving was enough. A way to measure it. A way in which that giving perfectly matches something else or fails to match it. That has never been what dana has meant. Offering is giving what you can give. Whether that is exactly what the person needs, it's a different question. Whether it is adequate to their definition of what they need is a different question. It's adequate because it's all of it. That's all. I say this because when we hear this from Dogen, that it's okay to give yourself a gift, it's easy to say, I think, because I have this impulse too. Oh, I really need I need some me time. I need it. So I'm going to give myself that. Go ahead and give yourself that. That's not the same thing. That's treating yourself with medicine. It's addressing a problem. For this, though, instead of imagining that you give yourself the thing that you really need, imagine instead the joy of making yourself a meal. It's not because it has to be that. It's not because you're starving. But you can feel in the act of cooking the act of offering. And then you can sit down at a table 6 feet away and you can experience the act of receiving. They're both full. Dogen continues, whenever we can give up even one speck of dust for the practice of dana, we should quietly rejoice in it. And this echoes what he said earlier, that we must not overlook any opportunity to practice dana. So whenever we can let go, whenever we can give up even one thing, even the tiniest thing, not only should we, but we can allow ourselves to feel the joy of that. And we can practice this in a million ways, as we've talked about. You can offer anything. You can even physically enact this by going down and picking up sand in your hand and letting it go. So that you are constantly returning to that act of opening your hand, of releasing your grasp, of saying, this is what I do. My job is the letting go. Because that is your job. It's your whole life. If you live your life in any direction but that one, I promise you, you will hit a wall. It is untenable to go any other way but that. Constantly releasing, constantly loosening your grasp. Take joy in that. Whether we give or receive, he says, we connect ourselves with all beings throughout the world. In an act of giving, pure giving, it doesn't have to be for this person or this person or this person. It's a complete release. In the act of receiving, it's the same. There's no separation, no sense of separation. And then we reach the last paragraph of this section. The Buddha said, when a person who practices dana comes into an assembly, other people watch that person with admiration. We should know that the mind of such a person... Oh, I apologize. Okay. We already read that part. Let's try again. The mind of a sentient being is difficult to change. This is important. We begin to transform the mind of living beings by offering material things, and we resolve to continue to transform them until they attain the way. Now, the way this is written, the way that we read this, it's as if our goal is to go around changing everyone's mind, fixing everybody, turning them toward the way. Right? A lot of texts have this idea, this language that we're not just vowing to liberate all beings, to save all beings, but in fact that we're vowing to kind of guide them, to turn their heads in the right direction. So he says the mind of a sentient being is difficult to change. We begin to transform the mind by offering material things. And then we resolve to continue to transform until they attain the way. And the only thing I want to say to that is, don't get stuck there. You are also a sentient being. I am also a sentient being. And the way that we begin to transform the mind of this sentient being is by this sentient being offering. That's enough. Don't worry about changing someone else's mind. Go ahead and change this one. And do that, he says, by offering actual things, whatever they are. Right? There's the offering that's in your heart, but there's also this actual enactment. Do it. From the beginning, he says, we should make use of offering. This is the reason why the first of the 6 paramitas is dana paramita. The vastness or narrowness of mind cannot be measured. Say that again. The vastness or narrowness of mind cannot be measured. Mind cannot be measured. And the greatness or smallness of material things cannot be weighed. He's talking about the things as the offering and the mind as the receiver. There's gift and there's receiving. And he's saying neither one of them can be summed up. Neither one of them can be measured according to our measurements. There is no small gift. There is no big gift. There's this gift. And the one who is receiving it, whether it's you or someone else, the bigness or smallness of the way in which they do that, also not the point. It's not real. It's received or it's not. And he finishes with this. He says, but there are times when our mind turns things. And there is offering in which things turn our mind. And we have to be aware of both. As we read a text like this, as it connects with us, as we connect with it, as we decide, I want to do this practice, that is our mind turning things. Our mind is engaging, our mind is saying, I'm going to take this up. That's before the offering. But then Dogen says, but in offering, it is the thing that turns our minds. It's this action. And all I think I need to say to that is that we shouldn't imagine that this giving, which looks so compassionate, it looks so magnanimous, right? And we're hearing that it's part of being a bodhisattva, that giving is not the end point of the spiritual life. It isn't a product of being a certain kind of person, right? You attain a certain spiritual level, a certain spiritual rank, where you're just giving. That's not it. It's not a costume. Your spiritual state, whatever it is in the process of the giving. It starts with the giving. It starts with the handing off. That means there's nothing to wait for. There's no you in the future that will be better at this. There's only you now doing it and being turned by it. So much of Zen comes from this place, from this kind of language, and it's to me very challenging and very profound. I've mentioned many times that there's a sutra that lists the merits of the robe, the merits of the kesa. And early in that text, it describes how when the kesa is there, when the robe appears, it manifests the monk. It's not that there's a monk. It's not that there's someone who shaved their head and now that they're a monk they put on the robe. This teaching says the physical expression is the beginning. And out of that actual thing, out of that material stuff, out of that gesture, whatever it is, arises the thing that we think we're looking for. The internal thing, the invisible thing, the quality. A teaching like this, the way the Dogen is talking about giving, is saying from 10 different angles, please don't get stuck on that quality. Please don't get stuck on that idea of who gives. Just give. And that will answer the question by itself. And that's where I'll stop.